Yeah, so who am I? Obviously, I guess I test a lot. I didn't know that, but I I do a lot of pen tests. I study computer science, computer security, and math in college. That's kind of how I got into infosec in terms of like learning security stuff from a technical perspective. And they also kind of point us and they're like, hey, there's this thing called DEF CON. There's this Linux distro with all these hacking tools on it. Like, kind of point us in the right direction for where to go for resources to learn on our own. Um, when I graduated, I started working pretty much right away as a software developer. Um, didn't really like writing software all that much. So I was like, well, I know this computer security stuff. Like, let me get good at that and try to get a job doing that. And initially, I wanted to be um, a malware analyst because like the whole Stuxnet thing had happened recently. I think I read Countdown to Zero Day, like right when it came out. And I was like, man, that sounds really cool. I want to learn that. And so you learn by doing it. So I like had my home lab and I was doing reverse engineering stuff. I think it was open security training info or dot info. It was a website that had a lot of like reverse engineering, binary analysis, webcasts, and kind of like trainings. And it was all free and on YouTube. And so I went through all that, and then I started doing like reverse me's and crack me's, and looking at some like older like malware samples. And I was like, okay, I'm getting okay at this. And then I was like, I really don't like this. I don't want to do this any more than I want to do software development. So I was like, I hadn't really considered pen testing. I used to think that like those guys are boring. They just run scanners and stuff and then write a report about it. And then I saw Security Weekly. There was this guy on there who had a pen test company, and he's talking about pen test puppy mills and how it doesn't have to be like that. And I was like, okay, let me try that. So it was back to square one. Home lab, intentionally vulnerable VMs, like a damn vulnerable web app, like just learning hacking skills, right? So that led to me getting a security job doing red teaming. And then right after that, I came to Black Hills and I've been here ever since. Um, Other things you can get me to not shut up about are golf, football, swimming. So if you ever want to hang out at a con or something to talk about stuff and get me to not shut up, those are all good starters. So as Jason mentioned, this is not a vuln research like 0 day exploit development like reverse engineering talk, right? Because that was my initial thing. I was like, they're like, hey Craig, we got this test. It's a desktop application, and I was like, okay, well, what's the expectation there, right? And initially, I kind of panicked because I was like thinking, I was like, oh yeah, I mean, I was a developer. I've done some reverse engineering. I've done network pen testing. I've done web apps. I've done all these different things. So I think I had the skill sets, but I was like, where do I even start? I don't want to end up sitting in front of a debugger for a week and them expecting me to find a 0 day and then not have anything, right? And so after I kind of like stopped panicking, I started looking around. I was like, okay, there's got to be a methodology out there. There's got to be a kind of uniform, kind of like thoughtful way to go about doing this. And I found out there wasn't a whole lot. Like I found like a Reddit post that mentioned some things that you might try. OWASP had like a little bit of a checklist. And so I kind of used that as like a starting point and then kind of built my own methodology. And I don't know if this is like a more recent thing, but I went from not doing any of these tests to I think I've done like 3 or 4 in the last year and a half. And I haven't done bug bounty in a while, but I looking into this because I wanted to have a sample to hack on for the slides because I can't show you screenshots of customer stuff. I was just searched like bug bounty programs that are public that have desktop applications in scope, and there was a bunch. So it looks like it's becoming more and more common. So this is kind of just like my high level, like how I approach looking at an application from a security perspective without going too in the weeds with all like the disassembly, reverse engineering, all the gnarly, complicated stuff. There's a lot of other stuff that you can do that you probably should do before you get to that point. So that's mostly what we're going to be talking about here. Uh, I want to kind of I want to make the point that this is like a pen test methodology. So I like to compare it to web app pen testing versus bug bounties, where a bug bounty is more of like a proof of concept or get out type situation, where a pen test is more about coverage and being thorough, and you're going to report things that they may not care about in a bug bounty, right? So this is kind of the same thing for desktop applications, where this is not like pwn to own looking for a 0 day like proof of concept, like POC or GTFO, right? This is like a methodology, like check all the things, like be thorough. Just want to make that clear. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to be scoping. And this is going to be usually during your ahead of your rules of engagement or during your rules of engagement. You're meeting with the customer. You're asking them, okay, like, what is it that I'm testing? And I always like to ask for a more inclusive scope. I like to have more stuff included. And some people might want to push back on that. They're like, no, we just want you to test the application. But it's like, well, the application talks to these servers and it uses these APIs and does all this other stuff. Like, can we include that in the scope? And that's not just me being like a greedy hacker man, like I want to have more things to hack on. That's a kind of a, okay, yeah, maybe these things were tested on like your regular network pen test or as part of like, maybe it's like an API as part of your web app pen test, but like, what if your desktop application has used it in a different way? Maybe there's more coverage to be had. Maybe there's a different context. So I like to have as much stuff included as possible. So like APIs, other associated infrastructure. I try to get them to provide source code if possible. Not that necessarily I'm going to like dive right in the source code immediately, but having it there available as a reference is helpful. And the other thing I also do when I'm doing the ROE and asking about scoping is I ask them for what their areas of interest are. What are the things in the application that they're worried about? What's the new stuff? Where are the skeletons hidden? Because a lot of times they know, and a lot of times they'll want you to go find that, and they can kind of point you in the right direction. And pretty much every test that I do, for the most part, I do some level of reconnaissance of some kind just to give myself more information. And for desktop applications, first thing I would want to start is documentation. Either if I'm going to ask for that during the ROE too, like, hey, give me whatever docs you got. I need that. If they don't give that to me, or they forget, or whatever, I can go look, and whatever's out there publicly available, I'll pull that down and I'll read that. And reading the documentation is really helpful because it'll basically tell you interesting features and stuff in the application that you might want to go attack. So like, oh yeah, it runs a service on this port that does this, or you can import a file and have it processed to do this. And it'll tell you the information, the interesting stuff in the app that you want to look at. A lot of times these are at least my experience from doing this. These are mostly commercial applications that are well known that people use, right? That's why they're paying to have it tested. So a lot of times they'll have had previously disclosed vulnerabilities. So that could be maybe just they do their own bolt. Like you just like Microsoft, Cisco, they'll post their own things. Hey, yeah, we had this vulnerability affects this. There's CVEs out there and stuff that get published. There's proof of concept exploits on ExploitDB and GitHub and other places. So you can go and look and see. And the idea is you're seeing, okay, like this thing has had vulnerabilities in it before. And one thing you want to check is like, okay, is that a common theme? Like, can I look for that same kind of vulnerability in other parts of the application? Because they may have fixed it here, maybe it exists somewhere else. Another thing that occasionally happens is that they have a vulnerability that gets disclosed and they patch it, and the patch is not completely effective. Like there might be a way to get around the patch. And a lot of times the researchers who find these things will go back and look and double check and see if there's another way they can bypass the fix. But that's something you can always look at and be like, hey, like this vulnerability. And then especially if it's like open source, you can go look, say, hey, what is the change that they made? And then can I think of a way to get around that? And then basically reopen this existing vulnerability. You're going to want to look in a lot of times these big projects they'll have GitHub repos, like GitHub accounts, and they'll have maybe not the entire source code, but they might have like dev tools they use. They might have other things or components of the application that are open source that they just have out there. And you can go look through those for secrets. You can look for information about how the application works. Another interesting thing, I haven't actually found any vulnerabilities doing this in an actual application I was testing yet, but it's something that I've recently incorporated, is a lot of times they'll fork a repo from an existing project, like a bigger, more popular project, and they'll like fork it to do their own extensions and things like that. Well, when they do that, they don't necessarily always like merge the other stuff that gets added to that main repo into their forked repository, right? So they can, it's like a separate totally separate thing. So if you go look at the thing they forked and look at its updates and commits and look for recent security issues in that, well, if it's a newer commit in there and they fixed a security bug, you can go check and see, well, does this thing exist in my customer's fork that might be in their application? And so that's just being lazy, really, and just like letting other people find stuff for you that you can use against your target. Look for secrets in there. Like a lot of times, like old commits, like if it gets committed, like API keys or creds or stuff like that, those kind of stay in your Git repo, even if you write over it. So you want to look for that stuff. There's other places besides GitHub, like Bitbucket, SourceForge. There's other places your customer might be hosting the stuff. So just Google dorp that stuff and go find as much as you can. Okay, so you've done a little bit of research. You've got your docs. You've read through the docs. Like you've done all this stuff. Now you have the application. What's the first thing you want to do? The first thing that I like to do is figure out what the application is doing on my host. So I have my every new test I do starts with a fresh VM. So I spin up my Windows machine and I download the application. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a registry and file system snapshot of this thing before I install and run the application. And I do that with, I think System Explorer is better. The Registry is the older tool that I've used. I've used them both recently. They both work, but basically they're taking a snapshot of the file system and the registry just of the machine. So you take one snapshot, then you install the program and you run it and you start doing stuff with it. And then once you feel like you've sufficiently sussed out all the functionality of the application and everything that it might do, you go ahead and you take another snapshot. And then you can compare those, and that will show you all the stuff that has changed on your test machine, like files, registry keys, stuff like that. And then you can go look at those for interesting things about the application. So you're looking for any interesting files that it put on there. If it's got logs or config files, you want to go look at those. A lot of times this will open up and expose additional attack surface if they've got like registry keys for servers they're talking to. They might I've seen keys and creds in registry keys too. So just interesting stuff that you might be able to leverage later. Go look at that. And then of course all the application files, you know where those are now. And so you can I like to take all those off, put them on a Linux machine and run strings on them just to get useful, ASCII strings out of these files. See if there's anything interesting in there. And that gives you a pretty good idea of like what the footprint of the application is on your machine as a starting point. Then you can look at the actual binaries and say, okay, like how do they make this thing? Like what language is this? You can use CFF Explorer, detect these. There's lots of other tools that you can use to point at binaries, and they'll tell you all kinds of interesting stuff. I think Gauger does it automatically. But you look at these things, say, okay, like get more information about like what's it written in. And if it's written in C# or Java, decompiling these to not necessarily the original source code, but like readable source code equivalent is pretty straightforward using tools like ILSpy, .p, JD, the tools that I've got listed over here. I haven't actually used any of the Java ones recently. I think the last time I've done this with a Java application was like a while ago, and I think I used the old JAD tool. But there's apparently newer ones that I came across when I was doing some research for this. So just know that if it's C# or Java, then you can probably get a pretty good representation of the original source in a pretty straightforward way. So that's helpful because then you can actually like walk through the source code. Yep. And then you can look at other things. So there's a lot of these like binary protections that these compilers and systems have like kind of built to help developers make code that's more difficult to exploit. So like your address space layout randomization, your safe SEH, your depth stuff, like your control flow guard. These are all things that you can like, they're basically compiler options that you can throw on there to make your application harder to hack. So you can check these with bin scope and with PE security. I'm going to have links at the end of this for all these things that I'm mentioning because I couldn't figure out how to make footnotes work in PowerPoint. So I just have a link slide with a bunch of stuff on it. So you can check that out at the end. But bin scope requires the debugging symbols. So that's something they'll ask for from the customer if they can get that when I'm doing the ROE. Otherwise, it won't work. But you can check things with PE security as well, and it'll just basically it'll go through all your binaries and check for these different options. And this is Canva. This is I mentioned the bug bounty program. I just picked one to. I didn't hack it or anything. I just kind of walked through this methodology. This is not anything they would care about, so it's not like a irresponsible disclosure that I'm doing this like this. So please don't get angry, Canva. You can check application signing with SysInternal Suite has got a tool called SigCheck. It basically checks the code signing of the stuff. And that's just an integrity check on the binary itself to make sure that it hasn't been like modified or dorked up by any malicious actors, right? It's the stuff that the publisher developer made. Process identification. So you can use Task Manager or I like Procmon. Procmon's pretty sweet. We're going to talk more about Procmon when we get to DLL hijacking. But yeah, you just look in here in Procmon, you can look at all the processes. You can look at the parent processes, like where it got spawned from, just to get an idea of like what processes your actual application is running and spawning and doing, right? Oh, I did want to mention, so this was something that was interesting. So when I was looking at the files for this thing, going through my the files that got added to the system, they had like a licensing thing for Electron. And so just like looking at that stuff, kind of that you like say, okay, well, what's Electron? If you Google what's an Electron app, and you're gonna find out that it's all this like web stuff kind of crammed into a browser in a desktop application. It's kind of like a really simplified explanation of it, but it basically just knowing that, like going through this stuff and figuring out what technology it's made with gives you a better idea of like different ways you can go about attacking it. I think I forgot to mention that earlier. Just want to go back and touch that. Memory analysis. There's some more complicated things you can do with this, but my favorite quick and dirty thing to do is just take your application process in Task Manager, right click it and create a dump file. And then you can run strings on that. And you can find a lot of interesting stuff because this thing will have data in memory that is potentially sensitive. It'll have like API keys, credits, private cryptographic keys that you might be able to then leverage against other stuff that hopefully you've had included in the scope and say, okay, this is an exposure here because this is all one system. It's not just this application. So looking for sensitive stuff stored in memory at runtime, that's the quick and dirty way to do that. Here's another one, DLL hijacking. This is one that's kind of like, well, as a software developer, like you don't control the endpoint. So there's this DLL hijacking thing where basically a malicious actor gets your application to load their DLL instead of one of your DLLs. And so, and it's based on the search order for how DLLs get loaded. And it starts with like the directory where the app was loaded from. Then it goes, looks like the system directory, and then like I think another directory, and then it looks like at your path variable. I don't remember off the top of my head, but it's basically that's where it goes to look for these DLLs. And if you can write a DLL of the same name to somewhere in a higher priority in this search order, then you can potentially get it to load and execute your DLL. The one that I look for the most, that I think developers actually care about the most or should care about, is missing DLLs. So if it's looking for a DLL that doesn't exist, and you can write to there, that's an opportunity to do this kind of thing. And so you use Process Monitor to do this. If you look here, these two green checkboxes in this filter are just the things that I added. So you're looking for a result where the name is not found and the path ends with a DLL. So this is basically like all the DLLs that it can't find. And you apply that filter and you can look at all the Procmon has everything. So you just look for your target processes that are looking for DLLs that it can't find. And what you do there is you just put your malicious DLL in there and it gets loaded and run. And this has applications for attackers and, because they can establish persistence, right? So let's say you get C2 on an endpoint and the person restarts their computer. Well, you just lost that, right? But if you have this, if you have DLL hijacking on like a commonly known software and you're pretty sure they're running it and you find it on there, then you can load this malicious DLL. So the next time their computer boots up and this application is run, your DLL gets loaded, boom, you've got C2 again. It works for privilege escalation occasionally, depending on the permission. So when you do this and your DLL gets loaded, you're now got code execution in the privilege context of the process that loaded it. So if you've got like, for some reason, a highly privileged process or software that loads your DLL, you're now running with those privileges, and that could be a higher privilege level than what you would have as like a normal user, right? Other interesting side effects. I was kind of testing a EDR that will remain unnamed, and so one of the things that I was testing is like, okay, what C2 can I get out? So I had like Cobalt Strike beacons, and I had a few of those that were going back up, and they were working fine. And it was also affected by DLL hijacking. And so it had the remote kind of quarantine feature, right? So you basically say, hey, we detected malware on this computer, let's isolate it. Well, I went ahead and did that on my test machine using their portal, and I lost all my beacons. All the ones, the regular ones, kind of went away, except for the one that was the DLL hijacking beacon, because it was actually running in their EDR process. And they weren't isolating that because they have to maintain that control over the endpoint to continue doing their EDR stuff. So that's just another weird kind of like some side effects of things that can happen with this that as a developer you might care about. Network analysis. Just use TCP view and see what it's talking to. So if you look here, Canva talks to a bunch of these web servers. At least they look like web servers based on the ports. And then it looks like it opens and listens on this port. And that just gives you an idea of like the network communications the application is going through. I like to always proxy web traffic through Burp Suite, because why wouldn't you? That gives you all the tools that you would do for your normal kind of web application pen test methodology against these other endpoints and other infrastructure, right? For other protocols and other traffic, you can use Wireshark to kind of just capture all that and then go through it. This is kind of like, this is very much generic. This is like a choose your own adventure because every application is different. But in this instance, like, so this port that it's listening on, this is something you'll want to fuzz, right? And so we'll talk about fuzzing. There's lots of, basically fuzzing is you taking a service that is listening or is some other way you can input data to this application, and you're feeding it a bunch of stuff. Garbage, for lack of a better term. Some of it's more calculated than that, but you're feeding it stuff until it breaks. And that's the long and short of how you start to find vulnerabilities in applications. There's a bunch of fuzzers out there for network stuff. These are just a few examples. I haven't used all of them. I really want to look at cluster fuzz because that's the one that Google does, that they use to find like thousands of bugs in Chrome themselves. These are just some examples of fuzzers that you can do for these network applications. So like if you got a desktop application that's opening a port and listening, 100% want to fuzz it. And yeah, I got through that really quick. That's 25 minutes. So here's the links. Deb's going to have the slides in a PDF format, so you can have all of these. And I guess we can do questions, Jason.
Hey, Craig.
I kind of flew through that, but
you did.
Hopefully I got it all.
Great.
Well, that just gives us more time for Q&A.
Yep.
Someone said, be aware that PE Studios now pay to play. So
Did not know that.
Yeah. All right. So if you have any questions about some of the stuff that Craig just covered, feel free to ask inside the, someone asked if you could put the links back up. You can also download the slides here through Zoom. So if you go to resources, is it in Zoom? Ryan, Deb?
Ryan? We can put it in Zoom.
Okay. It's also available in Discord and the slides resources channel. Okay, Craig, here's your first question. Are you ready?
I think so.
All right. How far will you take a desktop test? When do you consider a test completed?
When I run out of time.
Okay.
That's like the cheeky answer, but it's one of those things where it's like these are usually time boxed. I get a week, and then I get as much as I. That's why I want to do all this stuff before I start reverse engineering and doing all that like gnarly stuff, because I don't want to sit in front of a debugger for a week and not find anything and be like, oh, I looked. Here's my 1-page report. Like, I'm going to do all this stuff first to get more familiar with the application before I start stepping through the source code, debugging, all that stuff. So and then I do that until I run out of time.
Someone wanted to know more about the TCP view and what it does exactly.
It just looks at network traffic coming in and out of your device. That's a tool from System Internals Suite. It does TCP, UDP, IPv4, IPv6. It just tracks connections. It's like a really, really cool net stat.
Someone wanted to know, like, if you were getting started in this, would you start with Python, C, assembly, or reverse engineering? Or
I would say, honestly, I don't really know. I would, I just know what I did. Obviously, I studied, I knew how to code, and we did some assembly in college. And then the open security training, let me actually get that link for you. I'm going to look that up here because I got nerd sniped. That's where I learned a lot of this stuff from. And it's a little bit older now. This is probably 10 years ago. But they had some really good courses. There's a guy, Zeno Kova, taught some of them. And they had, it's opensecuritytraining.info. And it looks like it's all still up there. They had the introduction to assembly stuff. They had introduction to reverse engineering. The course they've got called Life of Binaries is really cool because it actually shows you how applications are put together and work and run. I would recommend those. There's probably something out there better, but that's just the stuff that I used, and I thought it was very, very good. But yeah, definitely you want to know assembly if you're going to actually get into the reverse engineering, and like if you're actually going to try to write a proof of concept exploit, you kind of need to know that. I don't typically get that far during a pen test if it's only like a week, but that would be the next step.
Someone said, is TCP view like Wireshark?
No, not in that it captures packets and stuff. It just kind of tracks connections. It's kind of a logger almost, whereas Wireshark will actually capture the traffic for you.
Okay. So we got a bunch of questions coming in. Keep the questions coming in because when a webcast isn't the full 60 minutes, we have a lot of time for Q&A. And for people who are intro and getting started in this is like your opportunity to ask someone who does this all the time, whatever questions you have. So Deb, did you have a question?
I'm gonna stop sharing so I can actually see the Zoom again and see the chat scrolling by a little bit.
Yeah, someone asked, are most desktop apps today Electron-based, and does this complicate the testing methodology?
I don't know. My sample size is not large enough to give an authoritative answer on that. But I understand that it's a pretty popular technology.
Do you like Process Hacker? VirusTotal marked it as malicious binary.
I have heard of that. I've not used it.
Okay. I have a Jason Blanchard question for you that I ask every single tester that comes on here. All right, so it's going to be a bit personal. Are you ready?
Yes.
You want to save that to the end, or you want to put in there now? Okay.
I want to go now. When you're doing a test as a pen tester, when you're doing a test and you're unable to find something or find a way in, do you start to question your own skills and abilities, or do you feel like this product or service is secure?
Not anymore. I don't really question myself. I just make sure I document everything that I'm trying to do. You can tell pretty early on now with the experience that I've had is like, it's more the latter. It's like this thing looks like it's pretty locked down, and you can tell pretty quick that none of the stuff that I'm trying to do is working. So it's time to document everything because they've got a lot of stuff done correctly, and that's good for them. And it's frustrating sometimes, but it's not like a bad thing. It doesn't freak me out anymore like it used to.
Okay. So there was a period of time it freaked you out if you weren't able to find something.
Yeah, I mean, early on when I first started doing this stuff, it was kind of like, man, do I just suck, or like, are they good? Like, I don't know. But now I've done it enough that like I can pretty much tell that they're good and I don't suck. So
yeah,
nice,
cool. Deb, do you have another question?
Yes, I do. I sure do. What method do you use to proxy traffic for desktop apps that don't honor the system proxy settings?
That's a good question. I've not encountered that. the worst thing I've encountered is certificate pinning, which is a pain in the ass because then you have to like get it to unpin so you can actually intercept the traffic. I've not encountered that in terms of not being able to capture, at least not that I'm aware of. I've been able to intercept HTTP traffic that I can see like TCP view. That I've not had an issue with that. So I don't know. I don't know how if I could see that it's like talking out to a web server and like in TCP view, and then I actually can't intercept that, then you're talking about I would have to start Googling. Like there's got to be a way, especially because I'm using a VM, there's got to be a way to hook that. But yeah, I would have to figure that out. That's a good question. I don't know. If somebody does know, I'd love to hear.
Yeah.
If I do run into that, I'm gonna want to have to figure it out on my own.
We had a question from Discord. Do you have an assessment playbook that you refer to when you do pen test?
Yeah, I mean that's kind of the methodology. This is kind of like if you my webcast methodology webcast that I did a while ago is kind of like me walking through my playbook. That's kind of like what this was for desktop testing. It's basically I like to have checklists and an order of operations and kind of like a well-formed methodology for how I go about it. So that's kind of like what this was up until the reverse engineering stuff, because I don't want to get into that right now. That's too complicated for a webcast.
I'm dropping the link to your web application penetration test methodology into the.
Yeah, that was a very similar talk. That was kind of a quick and dirty. Like I probably tried to do too much in that one. That's why I try to do not as much in this one. But that was very much like everything that I do on a web app pen test, like in terms of coverage, all in like an hour.
Another question from Discord. Could you please elaborate on compromising upstream repos so that stuff is pwned on their next build?
Right. So you're not compromising the upstream repo. You're looking at the upstream repo for vulnerabilities that have been fixed that are not applied to your target's fork, if that makes sense. So they've forked right here, and so they're over here, and the other repo is going up this way, and they find a security vuln up here, and they fix it. If that's not been done over here, then it's probably affected, if that makes sense. And I've not actually found anything using that technique, but it's something that I've started looking for because I'm sure it exists. Because a lot of these places, they're forking other existing projects to incorporate in their, that's a funny GIF, to incorporate in their products.
Yeah. This is a programming thing. Is Tom here? Tom, can you hear me? This is not like a seance. Tom.
Tom Smith, Tom
Smith, is your microphone working? Like, can you talk in the webcast?
I don't think
not in the chat. Not in the chat, our side chat. You're talking now? No, you're not. All right, so we got to get that fixed.
I did see a question. Somebody asked me about how much I Google. I can't scroll up, but yeah, I Google a lot, and it's not just because as a last resort. It's kind of a there's constantly new techniques and new tools and stuff coming out. Like I found new stuff when I was doing research for this since the last time I did one of these tests. So that's how I found about the Google fuzzer that they've got that I really want to play with. But yeah, I Google a lot, an obscene amount.
Hey, Ryan, can you tell if is Tom just watching the webcast or is he actually here in the webcast? I think he's just watching the webcast. Okay. Does anyone else hear Tom?
I do not hear Tom.
Okay. All right. It depends. Have you seen any interesting vulnerabilities that show up from cross-compiling frameworks like .NET MAUI that show up in desktop and mobile apps?
Not anything that I can think of. I don't really do a whole lot of mobile app testing though. So that is to say I don't do any at all. I used to do a little bit like bug bounty, but that was mostly just setting up an emulator and proxying through burp and doing web stuff against mobile apps. That's one of the few things that I don't actually do a whole lot of hacking on. So sorry.
All right. And then Ryan Poirier, can you please get Tom a link to join us?
Yeah. Well, Tom from MySpace is here, so
yeah.
Will that work? Okay.
Tom is watching. He's not paneling. Could you go ahead, Deb?
Can you talk about some practical ways to prevent DLL hijacking?
No, not really. I mean, there's just make sure you're not trying to import. Make sure you're including DLLs that you're trying to import with your product. I guess it's that's about it. Because there's other things like it's the search order hijacking stuff. Like that's not necessarily in your control as a developer because that's all about who's managing the endpoint. So letting them write to the system directory is kind of like, well, what am I supposed to do about that? Well, just make sure your DLLs are there, I guess is the one point that I would recommend.
What's your biggest secret you have? I guess as in the thing that you do that you don't see other pen testers do.
I don't know.
I do. I
None
know.
of it's what is it?
You are one of the best report as you go people at Black Ops.
Mhm.
Because you have to, or else
So
bad things happen.
Could
Not
you
just angry calls from John, but like just bad things in general happen. Like document everything as you're working and hacking.
can you like emphasize like what it looks like to report as you go? So if you don't know what I mean by report as you go, at Black Hills, John Strand to every pen tester, we even have a plaque that pen testers get when they get a job here. It goes on the desk. Oh, Craig's got his report
Nice.
as you go. It
Justin.
is it's the foundation of what Black Hills does. So Craig, could you emphasize what report as you go really, really means?
It means just that. I can talk more about the implications. So basically, you start off with your methodology. So I've got like a framework skeleton of the things that I'm going to do for whatever type of test it is, and then as I'm walking through my methodology, I am screenshotting and putting narrative for everything that I do, so that the report gets kind of built on its own. And then if I find a finding, I just throw in a little finding. Hey, I found this finding. Look up here for the finding. So by the time you're actually done hacking, the report's pretty much written, and then you just go through your findings, and it makes it really easy to just fill out the finding section. Then you write your exec summary, and it makes life a lot easier. Because I guess some people like writing and reporting. And I mean, yeah, we get to write about the cool stuff that we did, but like, I don't want to like get to do cool stuff for like the whole test and then like be stuck trying to write about it after the fact. So writing as you're doing it keeps you in the moment, and it's almost like I feel like sometimes even just writing it, it's almost like if you've ever heard of like rubber duck debugging as a developer, where you're stuck on a problem and then like you like talk to your rubber duck on your desk and you explain the problem and then it clicks and you get an idea and you fix it. That's the thing. That's a developer thing. But like just the act of like writing out the stuff that you're doing and documenting is almost like your own rubber duck debugging. Like it might give you ideas or spark thoughts or help you figure something out as you're going. That doesn't always happen, but it can happen. So it's another useful thing. There we go.
Nice.
There's a rubber duck.
Not to be self-promotional, BB King has a report writing class coming up at the Secure Code Summit in December. So we'll get a link for that in case you would like to take a report writing class with BB, who is pretty much the person who oversees a lot of the report writing that happens at Black Hills. Question, do you leverage AI while pen testing?
I do not.
Why not?
I just haven't found. I might soon. So I've heard people doing cool stuff with it for getting proof of concept code for like bug bounty exploits. So I might incorporate it in my methodology. I just haven't yet. And a lot of my writing, I can write it faster than I can get a machine to write it for me. Plus, I'm not so sure I trust like what the machine is going to tell me if you prompt it to like give you like technical information. So unless it's like code that I can run and test and see if it works or not, I just haven't messed with it personally. I know some people do, but I have not.
Craig,
Okay.
can you think of any? I'm kind of curious, Craig. Do you have any sort of hypothetical applications for AI during testing, even if you haven't tried them?
You could probably help. It could probably help with some explanation of vulnerabilities for like reporting. I've heard of a little bit of that, but I mean, obviously you have to proofread and check and verify that what it's giving you is not garbage and it's not hallucinating or whatever. The other things that I've heard is like people for rapid development of like little gadgets or scripts or tools they want to write to exploit something or add a functionality for their automation of their workflow or whatever. They can prompt it to provide that code for them and they can rapidly develop from that. Those are applications I've already heard of. Like I said, I haven't thought of any novel ideas that I would use it for, but I don't know.
I mean, the other thing you got to think of is when, one of the reasons that people come to, there's plenty of automated tools out there, right? So, I mean, you can check, this, that, or the other thing with automated tools with relative ease. You don't even have to be a security professional in a lot of cases, right? And the reason you come to a third party, pen testing firm, or even have a pen tester who works inside your organization is because you want the human touch. You want the creativity that's available. And so it's really just a question of, can AI ever duplicate that level of creativity, right? And possibly no, right? That's possibly a never. So, there comes a time when you got to think that, if the answer is going to be no, and it's never going to be yes, there's always going to be at least the vast majority of pen testing is probably going to be done by humans. At least that's my opinion.
Yeah.
I mean, if AI ever takes my job, I'm just going to get good at hacking AI and doing prompt injection. So we'll fix that right there. So
I would like to talk about how Tom appeared like the smoking man in the X-Files, and he's like shadowy, and he's
A little
just
shadowy.
yeah.
I know, usually we're on MS Teams and I'm nice and bright and shiny on Teams, but here I am just, in a cave apparently on Zoom. So
All right. How often do you actually get the source code versus doing black box testing?
I'd say 50-50. Like I said, I haven't done a million of these things. I've only done like 4 or 5. So, but yeah, 50-50, I'd say. And I don't really spend a whole lot of time in the source code unless I see interesting behavior and I want to like deep dive into it, or try to trace through where user input's going or where other inputs are going.
Like, do you start to see in code, Craig? Like, do you see the world in code now?
No,
No, it's
no,
not like
at
the
all.
Matrix. It's not.
No, that's a good thing. That would suck.
Okay. Okay. What is your favorite topic in mathematics?
I thought we had a math logic course that was really interesting. It was required for all CS students, but I minored in math. That was my favorite. I wasn't a big fan of anything to do with calculus. All the calc based stuff kind of hurt my brain, but the logic stuff was very interesting. It was very applicable to like coding and computer science type stuff. So I like that a lot.
Here's a question. Are you always looking for new tools for your methodology, or have you settled into
Yes.
the tools that work and you have enough?
It's fits and spurts. I'm always looking for the new hotness. I occasionally I feel like, oh man, there's got to be a better way, or is there anything else? And I'll occasionally just go look. So yeah, it's iterative. Like I'll get comfortable with stuff, and then as soon as I get comfortable, I'm like, okay, can I add to this? Can I make this better? Can I find something else to improve this?
As an endorsement here for Discord, if you scroll down on the left-hand side, you'll see the tool sharing channel. And so lots of people share tools in there, tools that they find, tools that they think is interesting. If you go down to the infosec/learn+share, that's where all the different categories are for you to like, hey, does anyone know about a tool for this or a tool for this? Or here's a tool I found that does this. And so it's a great like place to go and just harvest new tools or tools that people are finding that they really enjoy. So if you have a tool that you really enjoy, go ahead and drop it in tool sharing to share it with the rest of the community here.
This is an interesting question. What emerging tech is making your job harder?
I don't know, man. Nothing really.
Nothing?
I guess like WAFs and CDNs, that's not really new. They just, when you can't get a customer to get you on an allow list and let you through them, they can be kind of a pain. But nothing like just jumping out that I can think of that's been like, oh man, I can't stand this.
Interesting.
nothing sort of categorically new, just,
No, nothing.
progressions in existing technologies.
Yep.
Yeah. Craig, so this was an intro talk. So
Yes,
where do
yeah.
you go to get your intro advice? Like, because you had to start at some point. So where do you go to get started?
Google. So like, it's like I said, like I was sitting here and like I got this test coming up, and I'm like, well, I have all these skills and like this like broad skill set that I know is all applicable, but like I don't know how to organize it. So the first thing I did was I Googled desktop application pen test methodology. Like literally, I think that's what I typed. And there was some stuff out there, and I was like, okay, this is a good starting point. But that's literally it. I just start Googling.
Yeah. If you can't see all the channels inside Discord. On the screen, what you're showing right now is you go up to the top where it says Black Hills InfoSec, you click that down arrow, and then you say show all channels, and then that will reveal all the channels for you. So if you say show all channels, because sometimes, they're like, hey, Discord's overwhelming if you're new or something. So if you click all channels, you'll get to see them all.
And the
Speaking of
tool
which, go ahead, Deb.
I was saying the tool sharing channel is not private too.
Yeah, it's not private.
It's for everybody. Yeah.
It's for everybody. If you haven't checked in for Hackett yet, make sure you check in for Hackett. All right.
What's Hackett for those who have no idea what you're talking about?
So Hackett is our way of saying thank you for coming back and coming back and coming back and coming back and coming back at least 10 times. Then you get the access to the Hackett channel, where you can then talk to all the other people who have been here more than 10 webcasts. We send you a reward for 10, 20, 30, 40, and 50. We're still working on the reward for 40 and 50 because some of you got there faster than we expected.
Really?
So thank you.
When you get the pizza?
We talked about the pizza.
Talked about a pizza.
That's all we did though. And then we ate pizza. But
Yeah.
we didn't actually make a decision.
All right. I'm going to do one last question.
Okay.
Hit me.
Several people typing.
Oh no.
Tough choice,
Get it
Jason.
first. One
Okay.
Jason, what's the song of the day?
Are there any?
You were singing Kumbaya earlier. We could talk about that. It was very unnerving. It's the word.
If you click on your name inside Discord, you'll see how many Hackets you already received. And we started last year in November. So if you're like, I've been here for years, I know, but we started in November of last year. So we're coming up on one full year. All right. Last question. Are there any tools you would suggest for applications that use a local database backend? Any good ways of intercepting the SQL queries that you know of?
I would typically try to go. Sorry, there's a cat outside my window. My cat's freaking out. I would try to use the native database software if possible. That would be my go-to. Like whatever it's like, SQL Server. Like I would try to use whatever is meant to access and write to the database in the first place, and then just try to get the customer to give me creds or suss out the creds from memory or the source code or whatever. Configs, wherever that might be.
All right, I have one last question. This is going to be the last.
Okay.
Have you ever broken any functionality while testing which impacted the system or network resources? I wonder if this is like a client that knows you personally. Or if it's
not on a desktop application pen test. I've knocked some stuff over on other tests before though. Not intentionally, of course, but like it can happen.
Unintentionally.
Resource load on servers occasionally. We had one interesting one where they had some kind of load balancer where things that were supposed to be out of scope were getting hit even though they were not included in the scope for the scans. And so stuff happens, but nothing super crazy.
One last reminder, Hackett is right now only for Thursday's webcast, but starting in December, when did we decide?
January
Next
2025.
2025. The news on Monday at 5 will also count.
Yes. All right. So Craig, what we normally do is first of all, thank you. Thank you for coming here. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for answering all the questions that presented your way. We appreciate you sharing your knowledge. Thank you for coming here at least once a year and doing these. Make sure you check out Craig's last webcast on web app pen testing methodology. All right. So Craig, if you were going to sum up everything that you talked about here today in one final thought, what would that be?
Yeah, I mean, just figure out as much as you can about the application as possible, like before you get too in the weeds. Otherwise, you're going to sit staring at a debugger for a week and not have anything.
Yeah.
So look at all the different attack avenues. Think outside the box.
Yeah. All right, so what we're going to do right now is we're going to essentially end the webcast and say thank you so much for joining us. If you are on Discord, please stick around. Discord is like it's how the community keeps communicating in between the webcasts because the webcast lasts about an hour, but Discord lasts for forever. And so that's a place where you can ask questions, answer questions, and be a part of the community. Learn as much as you can, dive into the channels, harvest all the information you can possibly learn. This is a place for you to ask questions in a safe, place where you're not going to be judged or someone's going to think you're like, I can't believe you don't know that. All right. This is an intro talk. We expect intro knowledge, right? And so we're going to end the webcast now, but we're going to stick around. So we're sticking around. If you would like to do business with Black Hills at some point in the future for penetration testing, feel free to stick around. If you want to know what it's like to do business with Black Hills in the future doing penetration testing, then stick around. We are not going to do that while like we have you here. Like I've been a part of other webcasts where like the first 30 minutes is a sales pitch and then they talk for 10. That's not what we're doing here. We're giving you a chance to go, leave, stay in Discord, stay in Discord, but leave the webcast because we don't want you to be like, and then they told me about their sales process. Right, that's not what this is.
Gross, yeah.
All right, so I'm going to give you 8 more seconds. 8, 7, 6, 5, 4.
They're leaving
2,
drove.
1. All right. Okay, so the webcast is over. Craig's going to stick around a little bit. I don't know if we have anyone else here, but we got Tom, and you can feel free to ask questions about what it's like to hire us to be pen testers. You can ask those questions inside Discord.
We have SOC, active SOC. We can do instant
We have
response.
plenty of things. We have many things, many services.
And the reason we
Many
do this
offers.
every once in a while is because people are like, I thought you were like, you made backdoors and breaches and you did webcasts and like you had a training organization. I was like, all those things are true.
Yes.
And we provide services for people. So this is for those of you that may not know who we are. So Tom.
Yeah.
As
I'm
someone
here.
who, would you consider yourself a sales bro that works on commission?
No, 0%, Jason. 0%.
Thanks.
No, not at all. No, here's the thing. I mean, ultimately, at BHIS, one thing that we do is kind of make up our own job titles. So we don't have any formal job titles or formal reporting relationships or anything. So, consequently, I could call myself sales consultant or something, but why? That's not appealing to anyone. So no, we don't really do any sales. I mean, half the calls that we do, we don't end up proposing any work to the client. We end up giving out free advice, just having a conversation about what the client thinks next step. And I shouldn't even say the word client, about what the person who comes to us thinks are next steps on their sort of journey to security, if you will. So you have to forgive me, guys. I promise I don't live in a cave. It's usually not like this here.
Very dark.
So, yeah, no. Fact,
So Tom, like if someone wanted to do business with us, step 1 is probably email consulting or go to the website and do the contact us form and give us a little bit of what they're looking for. And then how many times do you hound them until they buy something?
No, we do 0 hounding. So ultimately, like if you reach out and you say, hey, I want to talk to BHIS about this, that, or the other thing, we'll invite you to schedule a meeting with us. And we'll do a call, usually half an hour. And then figure out exactly what it is that you want to talk about in the first few minutes and then spend your time talking about that. And, that might be a pen test. That might be talking about some sort of blue team services, be that, Security Operations Center, active SOC. It might be continuous testing that we have through the AnaSOC service. You guys who come to webcasts all probably know Corey Ham. And then ultimately, trying to figure out what it is that we can do for you. So Jason asked if we do any hounding. Answer is no. We'll invite you to have a call. And if you get cold feet and you don't want to do it, we're not going to bother you about it. And if you do want to see some sort of, proposal for us to do some work for you, we'll send it to you. And then after that, if you want to do it, we'll talk about how we can narrow it down and make it exactly what you want and provide that service. So that's ultimately it. It's low pressure, pretty much 0 pressure. But yeah, it's kind of how we roll.
Yeah. Like think of it this way. Like imagine if we were really friendly here, giving out knowledge and doing all these things. And then like you show up to the sales process and then it's like overwhelming. And it's like, I thought Black Hills was, and then you're like, oh,
that Tom guy though. Oof.
Yeah. What a jerk. No.
Yeah. We want to be who you think we are.
And who we actually are.
Yeah.
It's true.
So Tom, let's say they do schedule something, like what happens next, right? Because we have Craig here who actually does pen testing. And so like, Tom, do you then connect them with Craig? does Craig become a part of the call? Like, when does
Yeah.
Craig get involved?
Yeah. So, I mean, when I was low knowledge and first started, it was like we'd get a lot of help from Craig and company on calls to figure out what the heck it is that we can do for you guys. As our team has sort of developed in knowledge, that's a little less frequent than we have to, but we'll certainly pull testers in if you have something that's like, kind of an edge case or very custom. Then we'll certainly pull them in to assist in the original scoping. But otherwise, you end up working with our team generally, and then we'll pull in Craig or other testers when it comes time to establish sort of what we want the formal rules of engagement for the test to be. So when we get down to the nitty gritty of what a pen test or other engagement might look like, then we're pulling in the testers, figure out, hey, do you want to do a daily meeting during the test? Do you want to have a Slack channel open during the test? What IP ranges do you want to make sure that we're not scanning? Things like that. So when we get down to the nitty gritty about setup, things like that, that's usually when you're going to see the testers get pulled in. But yeah, if you call in, if you reach out to us and be like, hey, I saw this webcast and the thing that Craig talked about, that's exactly my use case. I'd like to talk to him directly. We don't hide the testers, technical resources away, so we can certainly pull the right people in right in the beginning if we need to.
Yeah.
Well, how often do you have people request to meet with you who have never had a pen test?
All the time.
All the time.
Yeah. I mean, if we have, if we meet with, let's say, 10, let's say this week we met with 10 people we had never talked to before, probably half of them have never had a test before.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that's maybe talk a little bit more about that, because some people might be fearful or just not even sure what it is and if they need it. And yeah, that's interesting to know that half of them.
Yeah. I mean, that's not even, that's just anecdata, but yeah, no, I mean, that's the thing. So, if you've never done a test before, any sort of penetration test on whatever it is that you're concerned about the security of, be it an application, a network environment, a cloud environment, you're welcome to reach out and we can talk through kind of what we'll have a conversation for a few minutes, figure out kind of where you stand in terms of security, what's keeping you up at night, and then ultimately how we can test whether or not this particular thing or that particular thing that you suspect might be a vector, whether it really is. And then we can sort of match up some kind of test or write some kind of test that meets your needs in the beginning. And the thing is, we heard about desktop application pen testing today, primarily. There's a bazillion kinds of pen test out there, right? And so what we're going to try to do is find the one that fits the needs of the organization we're talking to. If it's a smaller organization, obviously we're not going to try to push them into like some, ridiculous fancy red team engagement. Or if you've never done a pen test before, how do you get the most value out of it? Well, you look for the high level, low hanging fruit kind of stuff. And so those are the things that we're going to try to establish in the first conversation. Is like, where do you stand? How can we give you the most bang for your buck that's going to put you in a better position so that in the future, not only are you more secure, but should you want to do something else later, how do we position you? How do we help position you to be ready for that thing?
So, Tom, do we only work with like Fortune 50 companies, or do we work with whoever request stuff?
I mean, we work with, if General Motors wants to reach out, we'll talk to them. But if Bob's Bait Shop wants to reach out, we'll talk to him. It all depends on what ultimately you want to do. As long as what you want to do is something that we do and our range of services is pretty broad, then we'll work with you. We're not fishing for, big name clients. You don't have to be fancy or whatever. Despite the fact that we have, webcasts and a larger presence in social media and on the internet, doesn't mean that we're huge and impersonal or whatever. Everybody that you see on this webcast today is just a regular person. So, I mean,
except Brian, but
except for Brian,
another story.
People want to know if your house is haunted, but we'll come back to that.
He's ruled right now.
Yeah, it's
okay now.
It's fine. It's Halloween, you ask those kind of questions. So, Craig, once you give someone the pen test report, what happens at the end? Is at the end, do we like never see that person again? Is this like we're breaking up now? Like, what
No.
is the pen test report process like?
So I really, the way I do it, I mean, everybody's a little bit different, but for the most part, you deliver the report, and I say like, if you have any questions or concerns, we can discuss it if there's any modifications. Because the biggest thing is when you do a pen test report, it's the perspective of the pen tester. And I don't have the visibility. I don't have the ability to see necessarily everything going on in your organization or your systems, right? So a lot of times, like they'll have questions. They want clarification on a vulnerability or finding. They might have questions about methodology, how to recreate things, even though we try to make it as documented and well enough to recreate anything, but they might have specific questions about how to do certain things. They might have concerns or want to push back on the rating of a severity of a finding, right? And that's not as common, but those are things we can talk about if they're like, hey, yeah, we have XYZ control, and then I can look at it and we can maybe have a conversation about modifying severity. But that, for the most part, yeah, it's not like you get the report and then see like you're never going to hear from me again. We go over the reports together with customers if they'd like. I always offer that, but like, hey, we can go over together and walk you through everything that we did. So yeah, it's very much like an ongoing thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This question just came in, Tom, and I know that this one's probably pretty close to something we like really launched in 2024 really well because of the recognition that we've gotten in the industry. And it says, as an MSP, do you guys have any partner or reseller opportunities, or how does a relationship like that typically work?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So, yes, we'd be happy to work with you if you're an MSP. So, we do have, admittedly, some agreements. I hesitate to use the word partnerships. We do have agreements with a couple of different MSPs that we work with. We've also, in full disclosure, we've found some MSPs that we've tried to make things work with, and it just kind of hasn't come together. So, a couple things. We really like everything to be sort of above board. So we don't do white labeling, right? So, we don't work with an MSP who turns around and resells our services and then acts like it's them who did it. We don't do that. That's sort of one thing we don't really do. We like everything to be above board. Everybody knows who's who. Everybody, everything's kind of understood. If you, want to resell our services, and add value as a VAR, then we want to make sure that you're actually adding value and not gouging anyone. We don't like to be part of gouging. But beyond that, I mean, the more laid back you are and the more willing you are to have kind of open conversations and stuff. Well, obviously these are your clients. If you're an MSP, we're not telling you how to manage your clients, but people who are a good cultural fit from us as MSPs tend to be organizations who have sort of the same philosophy and approach as we do, where like to have good open conversations with their clients, understand kind of what their goals are, and not be super motivated by like commission. Obviously, we don't run your company, but cultural fit is a big thing for us in those times when we work with MSPs.
And then lastly, so if someone works with us and we do a pen test, and do you recommend that we keep doing that year after year after year after year after year after year after year?
The very same pen test, no, right? So a couple things. So we have some organizations that we have worked with for many years, and we'll do a certain particular type of pen test every year, but we'll do additional services above that that rotate year to year. So a good example might be an organization that's a little larger. Maybe they want to do an external network penetration test every year, right? Look at what their footprint looks like on the internet every year. Make sure that nothing's snuck in that they're not really aware of. But they'll pick a project every year and we'll work with them, say like, okay, this year we're going to work on this application. We're going to take a look, make sure this application is as secure as you think it is. And then next year we'll do like a wireless network penetration test. And the year after that, we'll do maybe maybe we'll look at their AWS environment, something like that. So there are some tests which are kind of evergreen, right? You know, a good one might be an assumed compromise. We could look for different paths than we looked for in previous years. But at the same time, no, we don't want to just do the same dang test every year. That doesn't make sense. I mean, if you haven't had any real change year over year between an environment, it doesn't really make a lot of sense to pour a bunch of time and money and effort into that when there's other things that you might test that are likely to be more fruitful ground for finding room for growth and security.
Unless compliance says you have to.
That's right. Yep. Craig hit the nail on the head. That's right. Yeah. Well, we're here for our annual external and internal pen tests, guys. So just, give us the same thing that we got last year. We do hear that. And you can't get around that.
Sure.
All right, Deb, did you see any other questions or have any questions of your own?
I think no, just a lot of really well-placed memes is what I'm so.
Well done with
yeah,
the memes.
I think we're good.
Okay. And then, this isn't like one of those, I said it last time, right? It's like not a Jerry Lewis telethon or something. It's, but for the people who've already reached out to us, who are like, hey, I'm interested in pen test. Thank you so much for reaching out. For those of you that have been customers of ours, clients of ours, thank you for your trust in us. And for those of you considering us in the future, we appreciate you trusting us enough to even like start thinking about the process, right? Because being a pen test firm is all built on trust. You are allowing us to come into your home and look and see what we can find. And we know that that takes a lot of trust on your part. And so we appreciate the trust that you've given us, will give us, or potentially you're considering giving us. So thank you so much for that. And hopefully we'll continue earning your trust over time. All right, with that,
I think we're
happy
good.
Halloween.
Happy Halloween.
Yeah. All right, Ryan.
Candy.
Kill it, Ryan. Kill with fire.
Hi, Ninja Pixie.
Bye, guys.
Thanks,
Bye,
y'all.
guys. Kill it.
Yeah.
Kill it.
All right, Ryan.